It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday, and this Feedback Friday, it's been a really weird week. Um, and come Monday, hi Scout, yes, Scout's here. Um, it's been a scheduling nightmare this week. Like my car was running rough, like undrivably rough on Monday. So I had to cancel everything Monday. I'm still bummed out because I was supposed to get the Invisalign anchors removed on Monday, but that didn't happen because the Uber was too expensive. I had to Uber to the doctor on Tuesday. That I probably should have canceled that too because it wasn't worth the $40 it cost, because I always tip Uber drivers. But anyway, and then just scheduling kerfuffles. The radio version of It's Not Therapy got moved to Wednesday because it got moved for a sports game, Steelers game. Just and it's the sun is reflecting off. Hi, Scout. Yes. Oh, everybody needs to see your butt. At least it's blocked by the microphone, so you're not buttholing the camera. Anyway, that's a metaphor. I'm at the National Women's Show on for today, Saturday, Sunday, which I was super looking forward to until I had an autoimmune flare up on Saturday, Sunday. So I'll get through it. Just, I wish I could do one of these things and just have fun and not have to, deal with pain management and energy level issues. And then, of course, whenever you do anything about anger or anything like that, you get criticized and you're sitting there going, why was it necessary to take this approach? And then I realized, well, because people learn what they live. And I'm right back to thinking that we overvalue being able to accept criticism, because quite frankly, I think that true wisdom comes not just from learning to accept criticism. It's knowing the difference between criticism that is good for you to accept because the person's right, and criticism that is worth rejecting. And the problem is, if I reject criticism, I get labeled a bitch. Whereas there's this performative thing. And I think in the short term, I don't know. See, I'm translating this particular one through the experience as being seen as a woman to the world, versus the way men have to navigate this stuff. It's a challenge because I'm trying to think about how to frame this that isn't going to trigger everybody, because sometimes things are true, but also very upsetting to people. By the way, rest in peace, Rebecca Heineman, a pillar of game dev, the first ever competitive game dev champion, or one of the first. She was a Space Invaders winner for a tournament back in the day. But look up Rebecca Berger Heineman. It's funny, is a nickname a dead name? Because she was trans and she assumed the Berger nickname before she became Rebecca Heineman. I don't know. That was not intended as a dead name. The story of that name is just wonderful. I want to acknowledge the passing of someone who was sort of undervalued, I think, because the bulk of the work she did in dev was porting games. But she was one of the co-founders of Interplay. So there you go. Let's do the help support this channel and then get into stuff. Yeah. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. So, men are raised with far more criticism than women are regarding everything but appearance. And that affects how they communicate and how they are received as adults. Right, Scout? Right. Because what women are raised to be, to believe is excessively critical for men is just sort of in some environments normal. I mean, I don't want to generalize too much. That's why I say appearance-based. Like growing up, attacks on my appearance were savage. The most awful comments about me in terms of attractiveness or desirability. When we remove Hassan Piker from the equation, women are way worse than men. And the whole, she harmed me, yeah. Let's face it, the men who do that are picking it up from Stalker Chan. So she started that crap. The guys are just echoing it because they can. But, you know, that sort of scene, it's interesting to see how people bought her crap for a really, really long time. That's becoming less and less, you know, an issue now. But, you know, the gruesome twosome stalkers, they're not getting the same traction with the exact same accusations because it's not considered, you know, manly to have those complaints. It's like, toughen up, take it on the chin. And I don't think that's right. And a lot of comments reflected that. The problem is, it's very hard to break the cycle of criticism when you were raised in it so much that you don't see how you're perpetuating it. And one commenter accused me of a bad mentality on Monday's video about young men are angry. And I said to him, you know, you didn't give enough detail. You extrapolated something, the idea that it's just, oh, it should still be a switch flipped into manhood. You're just pushing it 30 years later. I never said that. And that was an assumption of intent, hence mentality. And I said, look, that was so vague. I can't do anything with that. And there's an example where that was me doing a lot of extra work to not just dismiss a criticism, but going, look, you're criticizing something you think I thought, and I just didn't, you know. I said to him, it is just fact that human brains are not fully mature at 18 or 21. Personality is not fully formed then. And this idea of a new developmental phase that isn't quite adolescence, isn't quite full adulthood, is not saying you just flip a switch at 30. It's actually more between the ages of 25 and 28. Like this zero-sum hyper-competitive mentality that men are raised with, it seems, that clouds their assumptions instead of going, no, like, gradual as possible, or at least progressive, not in the leftist way, but sort of, you know, you add a little, the way we do with teenagers or are supposed to do with teenagers, that you give them a little more freedom of and autonomy, starting at around the age, well, it used to be 12, now kids are not given that. And there's a lot of debate regarding how much to protect people versus not. And it was interesting to see the the Epstein survivors press conference this week, where they were holding up pictures of them at the ages they were when they were first preyed upon by Jeffrey Epstein. And these girls were 14, 15, 16 years old. And it just struck me that for all the rhetoric about protecting children, protecting girls, you know, we're great to talk about protecting girls when, you know, conservative politicians want to slam trans teens and the medicine that they deserve. But when it actually comes to doing stuff, you get shit like the Epstein debacle. I mean, girls were not protected there. And, you know, the idea that you should protect boys, that's even thornier. Because the only thing that they seem terribly interested in protecting boys against is, you know, pedophiles, kinda, sorta, right? And that is not me being cynical. I've personally been aware of so much abuse of boys between the ages of like 12 and 15, 16 years old, committed by other minors, that, and people freak out when you talk about this, because people love to have a victim and a victimizer in these situations, instead of recognizing that both, you know, both people there, one more than the other, but both of those minors are victims. One just was a victim who victimized. And those are very challenging moral dilemmas of what you do in those circumstances, because you have to communicate that the person who was abused there, that it was wrong. And even though there's context to the abuse, it doesn't mean that what the other minor did was okay. But then what do you do with that minor who did a very bad thing? And unfortunately, in the world now, because, oh, you can't be soft on crime, the idea is that minor that did a bad thing is a bad person forever, no going back. You are just branded with some label. And then you have Megyn Kelly arguing about whether Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile or not, as opposed to, I forget what they call someone who, you know, abuses teenagers instead of children under the age of 12. And while that's technically, she's not wrong, is this really the time to bring that up? And hey, maybe her comments were taken out of context. That happens a lot. Very interesting to see a completely different side of Marjorie Taylor Greene at that press conference, you know, a much more human side. To see how affected she was by being called a traitor about this, right? She wasn't a traitor over the Jewish space lasers thing, though that was actually a combination of two comments. You know, all the, as Trump says, wacky stuff she's done over the years. No, none of that got branded her a traitor. Supporting Epstein's victims did. Right. You see how far the rot goes. And this performative caring about women. And I say performative because, you know, the whole Epstein thing shows that young women and girls are not as protected as the lip service would have you believe. The counter argument is that boys are even less protected. And I think that's true, even though the idea that abusing, you know, sexually abusing a young boy is considered worse than a girl. The number of times I have heard the response to a, a priest who abused children or something like that, or a teacher. And when it's a female teacher who abuses a boy, there was just somebody convicted in Canada of that. It's seen as which is wrong. When it's a man abusing a girl, it's considered bad, but at least it wasn't a boy. It's really fucked up in terms of how we sliding scale these things, and everybody gets fucked up differently by it. And the reason I bring this up now is because the boy who got abused is not more protected because it's seen as worse. Because he isn't. He has to live with that in silence because, I mean, I've had a small amount of what men go through in terms of not wanting to say anything about what I went through as a kid, because people look at you differently, people treat you differently. And, I'm hard enough that people don't, it's very sobering when people start talking about their own abuse and say it was nothing like what you went through. And I didn't realize how bad my upbringing was until I started talking about it and starting getting those reactions. 'Cause it was pretty common where I grew up, and I went to school with kids in the foster system who had been through way worse. And I mean, that's the problem, right? We're taught, if somebody has it worse, your pain doesn't matter. The abuse you suffered doesn't matter. And that's not true. I know from my own perspective, when somebody talks about what they went through, I don't see what happened to them as not that bad just because there was no physical violence involved, or only because it only happened a few times. Or we got to stop doing this. Everybody's had shit happen to them. Some people have had a lot more shit happen to them than others. And this idea with men that you failed to prevent it is so toxic, because the element of surprise trumps any physical strength or any of that. And the tendency that people tend to freeze in those instances. I'm sure that, because I know that one of the things in the 90s that they trained us to do, and now I had to unlearn it, was, you don't want to get, and this happened to me. Somebody attacked me. I fought them off. I was seen to be fighting. I got in trouble. And so you stop fighting because, zero tolerance. You don't want to get in trouble. So you take the beating or you take the groping. And we were trained out of that. No, fight back in the age of AIDS. And then I had to unlearn that when reciprocal violence came in, and I discovered that after the fact, no, you weren't believed. No, you weren't seen as defending yourself. You were all the reasons why you shouldn't have fought back. And that's unfortunately what men get into with this stuff, because people don't start being abusive physically. The emotional stuff softens you up for the physical abuse. And so when the physical abuse starts, it's, well, nobody's going to believe me. I should have left. I should have walked away, all that stuff. And narcissistic abuse is in the news a lot. And I've done a ton of research into this stuff, and I admit I have no idea what separates narcissistic abuse from abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's gaslighting. I guess gaslighting is a ruined term, so they're bringing something else up. But abuse is abuse, whether it was done to you by a narcissist or not. The only thing that changes is the narrative about it. No one deserves to be abused. Just because somebody's not a narcissist doesn't make the abuse you suffered any less bad. And I do think a lot of men are walking around feeling like they can't talk about it because it's not that bad, or they should have prevented it. There's a lot of shame. And so when and there's also this thing where this idea that you're not far enough along in life. And this one's interesting to me because I read a lot of old books. And then there's a lot of like Japanese media that I consume. And so this American with a side of Canadian idea, and maybe it's true in Europe as well, I don't know. But this paradigm of you should be married and have kids, certainly by the time you're 40, maybe by the time you're 30. And that's the marker of success. If you don't have that, you're less of a man. And the paradigms I've come from, Sherlock Holmes would fail there. Dr. Seuss would fail there. Both never had children. Dr. Seuss was married and obviously not a fictional character, though it is a pseudonym. Wasn't Theodore Geisel? Was that his name? But a lot of the heroes that I grew up with didn't have kids. I mean, Batman didn't have a kid until Damien came along, and that I was an adult by the time that happened. You know, Superman didn't have kids because it was all Spider-Man didn't have kids until, I mean, it was a while before they introduced Peter Parker as a dad. So, you know, the examples of men and good men that I grew up consuming are clearly different. Now, to me, I'm biased by the fact that it's better to not be a parent than to be a shit one, in my opinion. But obviously that's my own upbringing talking. And I do think we need to do something about this idea that unless you have a partner and biological children, you are less of a man, because it is not so. I mean, does Wolverine have any biological kids? X-23 is like a clone or something. I don't know. But I mean, Magneto's a dad, for whatever that matters, right? And we do see that priority more among conservative men than liberal men. But my channel doesn't skew conservative, so the fact that that opinion is even coming up here indicates we need to do something about it and show other ways of, you know, being. And I don't think it's even socially acceptable when it comes to male hierarchy. You have to be in that upper percentile, or, you know, the men who are higher up in that hierarchy shit on the men that are lower down. And I don't know how you stop that, because that is so ingrained. I think you just have to create alternatives for men who do get picked on, while also being quite vigilant that, like, hey, yes, you were harmed. We're not just gonna let you lash out and, take that out on other people. When you feel small, it's hard to connect to the idea that, you do still have the potential to hurt other people. You're like, I'm not important. Why would they care what I think? Well, think about, one nasty comment isn't going to bother so much, but you've got 50 of them an hour flinging at you. And nowadays it's like, it's bots, but not every single one is. Like, it's tough because if you just go, fucking bots, trolls, you're ignoring criticism. It's a no-win situation for everyone. And so what I finally decided to do about it was, look, all I know is my own behavior. And I've backed way off on the fighting, the sparring online, just because I go back and forth to whether it's morally wrong or not. A part of me thinks probably some of the things I did were, but I didn't see it at the time. You live and learn. But more importantly than that, it's just not what I want to encourage. Because, well, individually, everybody has the right to criticize. No one is immune from criticism. I have to admit that when I get bad mentality, disingenuous, hypocritical, uninformed, and then you get the real nasty stuff, which I'm not even going to bother with because that's just like so over the line. These are things that people believe, but it's all very vague and highly subjective. And I do find myself going, next, which I feel like it's not really fair to the person who said it in good faith. But at the same time, I can't do anything with somebody going after an intention I just didn't have. Like, they just read shit in that wasn't there. And if even saying that is, you're just dismissing valid criticism, you're ignoring legitimate grievance, and acknowledging I've heard you, I think it's in good faith, it's too vague for me to do anything about it, and you're assuming something that was in my head that wasn't there. That's not ignoring criticism. It's just not agreeing with it. And unfortunately, there's this paradigm, and I may do this, I may handle this on Monday. I got to make a note now. But trying to be validated through criticism isn't healthy. But, you give a criticism, somebody accepts it. Oh, that's validating. You were heard. That's something that men are trained to do a lot more than women. And I think it's leading to a lot of unhappiness because nobody likes to be criticized. The likelihood of getting a good result when you come at somebody with a you statement, you have a bad mentality, as opposed to an I statement with, I think I get what you're going for. I see it in a different way. And then saying the exact same thing. Like, instead of it just being a switch that flips, I think it needs to be this gradual thing. You're getting to the exact same point, but you're going to get a much better result if you don't lead with a criticism. The thing is that social brutality that men come up in is so ingrained that alternative, that quite frankly, if you try it, you will get much better results and people will see you as much more charming. Trust me, but it feels unmanly. It feels weak. You're not fighting. You're not taking. And one person said that, we've spent all this time liberating women from patriarchy, but we're not doing the same thing for men. I agree with the sentiment. I would say it's time to stop using the term patriarchy and start talking about male hierarchy. Precisely because any guy can acknowledge that a male hierarchy exists. Patriarchy, people start fighting about whether or not it's actually a thing. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.